So I caught this really hilarious clip that the Majority Report found of Dave Rubin. Now, you may have already seen this, but I wanted to do a video on this because it's something I have to add to this. But it is a clip here of Dave Rubin. I think he's just doing one of his live stream Q&As that basically everyone does. And he explains that basically he tried getting on Joe Rogan's podcast again for the release of his new book. A lot of people will do like promo tours when they come out with the book or a movie or whatever it is they're coming out with. And so I want you to go ahead and check out the clip right here.
Will I go on Rogan's podcast? I asked him, and our PR people asked him about a bajillion times to go on for my book. We did not get a response as far as I know, so I don't know what happened there. A little weird for me to say that publicly. I don't know what happened.
So what's really fascinating about this clip is I kind of noticed Joe Rogan taking some subliminal shots, although they're honestly not all that subliminal when you really listen to what Joe Rogan was saying. But if you listen to what it is that Joe Rogan was saying in this clip right here, this clip is from November of 2018. So the last time that Dave Rubin appeared on Joe's podcast was, I believe, June of 2018. We are now in July of 2020. That means it's been more than 2 years since then. It's a pretty big gap, although, you know, not too uncommon for some guests. But after you hear this clip, I think you'll really see what exactly is going on with the whole Joe Rogan, Dave Rubin dynamic.
This is possible that people can realize that there's some stupidity to this team mentality that we have.
Right.
This right versus left, which is almost all, a good percentage of it is these assumed identities, right? These predetermined patterns that get adopted in order to, as we first started talking about this, in order to establish yourself as someone who's in a group.
Right.
You get accepted by this group. And you see it left and right. I mean, I don't want to name any names, but there's a bunch of people that do it blatantly. You see them, and I've even seen them switch teams. And you see them switch teams, and I don't buy their rationalizations when it comes to ideology. What I think is what they're doing is they're switching teams because they realize there's an in on this team.
Right.
And they can just say, this is the problem with the team I used to be on. Those fucking losers. And they're really Benedict Arnold, right? And like they probably have as much of an affinity to the ideas of one side as they do the other side. They just go all in on one side to get acceptance from the group.
Right.
There's no way people change their opinion that much over 2 years or something like that. Or, you know, it's like they just decide this group makes more sense now. And I've been attacked by people on the left, so I'm going to go to the right, or vice versa. And usually what it is, I mean, even when they say they've been attacked, like, oh, you fucking baby, there's 300 million people just in this country alone. If you put something out there publicly and 1,000 people attack you, don't act like you're being persecuted, okay? You have an idea, you've launched that idea out into the zeitgeist, and people took a big shit on it. You know, whether it's people on the right or people on the left, you got to be able to argue your point one way or the other, and not just immediately jump ship when someone who shares ideas with you decides that your idea sucks. And maybe they're wrong, and maybe you're right, but you got to argue that through. But this idea of these partisan patterns that people just seem to automatically fall into, they're so detrimental to dialogue.
And so as you can clearly tell there, Joe Rogan is essentially not really a fan of Dave Rubin. And I think he kind of came to the realization that Dave Rubin is a hack and a clown. And I think that realization really came to him when he had Candace Owens on, who Dave Rubin was a big pusher of Candace Owens. And if you watch Dave Rubin on Joe Rogan's podcast that previous time, they get into an argument about building codes, and Dave Rubin is saying all of his dumb garbage. And with Candace Owens, he was saying that Candace Owens could run for Senate. Dave Rubin also said that Candace Owens could be more influential than Kanye West in the black community, which is like, that's some insane, crazy type of stuff. And so Joe Rogan, he was so shocked. He was like, are you high? It's really hilarious to watch, honestly. Probably top 10 most embarrassing Dave Rubin moments, although that's a pretty long list, right, of total embarrassing moments. And so I think once he had Candace on and saw how dumb Candace was, you know, Joe and Candace got into a back and forth about climate change, where Candace Owens had no clue what she was talking about, just completely exposed herself. And so I think he kind of grouped the two together and was like, oh, these two people are just hacks. they're partisan frauds. They don't add anything to the dialogue. In fact, I believe them to be basically people who, he says it in that clip. He says, well, how can your opinions change so much in just 2 years? That's literally talking about Dave Rubin right there, and Candace Owens for that matter, because Dave Rubin had his flip so fast. It was literally within 2 years. Pretty much exactly 2 years. So Joe Rogan is, I think, stepping away. He's definitely distanced himself from Candace Owens. But when it comes to Dave Rubin, he seems to have completely distanced himself. He hasn't had him on. And then if Dave Rubin is willing to say that publicly, that means that he has really been trying to reach out to Joe Rogan a lot, to have him back on the Joe Rogan podcast. So that's a pretty big deal right there. And I think that Joe Rogan's kind of fraud meter was like buzzing pretty hard with Dave Rubin. And so I think he just basically was like, hey, I think he was just like, hey, I'm going to distance myself from Dave Rubin because I believe, he is a fraud. I believe that he's a fraud, and so that is what I think he did. And so this is very interesting when you see this kind of a thing, just to see kind of the different ways that Joe Rogan goes, because he was heavily bringing on Dave Rubin and listening to a lot of his suggestions for guests and stuff like that. But I think he's distanced himself from that. He also had his disagreements with Jordan Peterson and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely some interesting Joe Rogan chronicles, to say the least.